Well, I'm very excited to be with all of you today. This is the first day of the National Association of Media Literacy Educators Media Literacy Week, and it's the very first time that the Kansas City Public Library has been a part of it. We're a new partner, a proud partner, and because media literacy and literacy education is really part of our mission here at Kansas City Public Library to be a doorway to knowledge for all people. And I want to put that right here in the, we're also closed captioning this program just to make it much more accessible, since that's part of what we're talking about today. And if you'd like to know more about the themes this week, I'm including that in the chat and also in our closed captioning, because today is all about access. Tomorrow will be about analyze. These are all different facets of media literacy. Wednesday will be about evaluate. Thursday is about create. And Friday is about action. I love action. And if you'd like to know more about what we are doing here at the Kansas City Public Library each day, these are lunch and learns every day. And you can find out more resources and our calendar so that you can register to join us in the link that I've sent into the chat. Without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Miranda Pratt.
Thank you for the context and the introduction, Jenny. Jenny put this whole thing together, which I think is just really rad. She's very on top of everything all the time. But today I'm going to be talking about access, the first theme in National Media Literacy Week, and specifically about Wikipedia and how that relates to open access software. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the services that the library provides to bridge barriers with different barriers to access in terms of technology and other things. So bear with me as I pull up my PowerPoint and then we'll get started. Awesome. So for people who don't know me, which I think is probably everybody on this call besides Jenny, my name is Miranda Pratt. I am the Wikipedian in residence at the Kansas City Public Library. I got hired in May of 2021, which is this year. And I just teach people how to use Wikipedia, teach people how to use it as a tool, and how to do whatever they need to do on it, and try and advocate for Wikipedia, because I believe in open access software as being something that is really important. So I lead a series of Wikipedia 101 courses, and they happen monthly. So this month we have 2 this week, this one and then one on Thursday, where we're going to be writing Wikipedia articles on different newspapers, like local newspapers in Kansas City, and talking about how to edit Wikipedia together. Next month, we're going to have a Wikipedia edit-a-thon, which is a group where a bunch of people who may or may not know how to edit Wikipedia get together and improve a specific topic area on Wikipedia. And that's going to be on November 20th in partnership with the Black Archives of Mid-America on notable Black Kansas Cityans from this catalog that they create every year. So that should be really good. If you'd like to be added to our mailing list, I will send a follow-up email with everybody and keep you in the loop. For our agenda today, we'll cover Media Literacy Week briefly. Jenny already kind of went in depth, so I won't spend too much time on that. We're going to talk about the theme access and what that means. We're also going to be talking about open access and open source software, and getting a general overview of Wikipedia. Also talking about barriers to access specifically with Wikipedia, and then movements that are working to close gaps on Wikipedia in terms of content and contributors. Part 3 is going to be tech access and other library resources that are working to close these access barriers. And then we're going to have space for questions, and I have a resource slide that I'll share. At the end of this presentation, I will send out an email once the recording is uploaded to the cloud, and I'll record that and I'll send that there. And then I'll also send the slides. So you're welcome to use them however you feel. But a lot of things in the slides are hyperlinked, so they're good to have. Really quick, we're going to do an access check. An access check is something that's used in a lot of disability spaces. So it just means if you feel comfortable, you can turn your camera off. You can leave whenever you feel comfortable. You don't have to stay. It's not rude. It's just we're all here. Thank you for being here, and you can leave whenever you please. And if you need any additional accommodations, feel free to message Jenny Garman. And we will either try to get those met today or try to get those met in the future. Because this theme is about access, but all the time I want to make sure that accessibility is much of a priority as possible in this space. Jenny Garman is also doing transcribing, but we don't have as a library the automatic captioning service yet, so she is hand typing it. So if it doesn't totally sync up, just know that that's something that we're pushing for within the library space. But if you'd like those to be turned on, you can go to the bottom of your screen and click the ellipses, and then you can click show subtitles, and it will show you what Jenny's typing as she's typing it. If you'd like to update your pronouns to reflect your gender identity in your little picture box, you can click the ellipses on that and then change your name to reflect that. Everything is being recorded. I will stop recording before the Q&A, so you can ask what questions you feel comfortable with without any sort of video kind of thing. And that's about it. We will get into the media literacy introduction. So like Jenny said, this is part of a larger National Media Literacy Week that's happening across the US. And I was reading that they took that from Canada, so that's something they do too. But what is media literacy? Wikipedia says it encompasses the practices that allow people to critically evaluate, access, and create and manipulate media. Media literacy is not restricted to one medium. So that means that it can be on print or in the web space or anything. It's kind of like a newer type of literacy. For example, other ones are like financial literacy or like the literacy we refer to a lot, which is like reading, right? But media literacy teaches people how to navigate this information infrastructure, which is a term people use to describe like the vast amount of information online and in print and everywhere that we are shown all of the time. So we're also going to talk about media literacy and access specifically. In media literacy, access is defined as how, when, where, and how often people have access to the tools, technology, and digital skills necessary to thrive. And I'm not sure what they mean by thrive, but I think that we can kind of infer that they mean like living in hopefully a just society, which I don't think is what is happening right now. But besides that, I think that access is really important, and working to bridge those kind of access barriers within media literacy can help us all become better consumers and creators of information. So we're going to talk about open access materials. If you're familiar with the term open access, it just means things that are like open for people to use and reuse and read. So for example, if you've ever used JSTOR, that is not an open access software. That is a proprietary software, which means it's a paid kind of platform. And that's a big barrier for a lot of people because those articles are really expensive. And so knowledge is gatekept by having all of this kind of money that you have to pay to read something about something you want to learn. So open access is a concept that means like, oh, this paper that's written by a scientist isn't like $500, it's free online and I can use it, I can distribute it, I can reuse it and connect it to my own ideas. So it's like very, very low copyright to no copyright restrictions on things like that. Specifically refers to often like journals, books, and images and other published materials. Open source software is a little bit different than open access materials, but it is the same kind of ideology, like kind of framework where it's like the code is every website has a code, right? And the code on open source software is free for people to take and remix and create their own software. So if you've ever used GIMP, which is like a free version of Photoshop, I think there's a couple, Audacity is like a free sound mixing software, but those are open source softwares. So people will take those and remix them and create their own kind of unique software. And those are great because they don't cost money. Like Photoshop is like $60 a month, right? Like if you're paying for 2 of those things, but those are totally free. So both of those concepts come together and create Wikipedia. Wikipedia is an open access and open source resource, which means it's a great tool for students and anybody that's looking for information online. It's often the first place people go for information online. And so knowing how to use it in a way that will help you get the most out of it, I think is really important. There are like lots of like people who are wary about Wikipedia as being unreliable and all sorts of things. but it's actually used by a lot of professional fact checkers, and it is like almost as reliable as a print version of an encyclopedia, and it can be like edited consistently. So it can be more up to date than a print version of an encyclopedia. And everybody uses it, and it's free. So this is me arguing for Wikipedia, but I think it's a great place to bridge those access gaps. So we're going to talk about the history of Wikipedia really quickly. It's 20 years old as of this year. They had a whole party if you're like in with the Wikipedia crowd, which is Nation Online. It was founded in 2001. It's grown into this gigantic crowdsourced open access open source encyclopedia, which means it's free and everybody contributes together. As of today, there are over 6 million content pages on English Wikipedia alone, and there are over 250 different language Wikipedias. So not just English Wikipedia, although sometimes when people refer to Wikipedia, they mean English Wikipedia, and we should all be more specific because there are many languages. The site fluctuates between the 5th and the 10th most visited website in the world. And these 3 books are all about Wikipedia, and they kind of trace like the history and context of Wikipedia based on their publishing dates. I think Andrew Lee's was published in the very early 2000s, and he's really cool. He works for the Smithsonian as their Wikipedian in residence. So it's like my job, but it's longer term, and he helps like connect their collections and reliable sources to Wikipedia. But as you can see, this book is like written with this idea that Wikipedia is this revolution and it's like really grand and cool, right? So it's like less critical and more like, ooh, you know. And the second one is Leveraging Wikipedia by Merely Profit. So those are a collection of essays. I think Andrew has one in there as well, but they talk about how to use Wikipedia in a classroom setting. So that's like a really, really good tool if you're trying to plan programming around Wikipedia and using it within libraries or classrooms or other things. The essays are super easy to read, and they also provide a lot of great information. The third one is Wikipedia at 20, Stories of an Incomplete Revolution, and that just came out this year. And I think it's like a more critical reflection of Wikipedia than the other 2. The first one being kind of like, this is what this cool thing is. And the second one being like, here's how you use it. This one's like, here are these knowledge gaps that we're seeing, and here's how we can use this tool to fill those. And here are things and questions we still have. So those are all really good books. And like in the spirit of Wikipedia, the last 2 I think are open access. So you can find those online for free and just read them at your leisure, which is great if you're interested in that. So Merely Profit wrote that book or edited that book, Leveraging Wikipedia, Connecting Communities of Knowledge. And she says that Wikipedia has this visibility on the open web that libraries lack. Libraries, whether public or academic, like at an institution, like a college or whatever, hold collections that can bring depth to Wikipedia articles and can provide high quality support materials in order to build better articles. So it's kind of like an ultimate partnership, right? Like for my job, I'm working to like add reliable library resources to Wikipedia and also teach other people how to do that so we can make it a more reliable tool for everybody to use. And it has some like really cool components, like we're all creating this kind of knowledge base online together, which is like a more radical idea of thinking about knowledge instead of people who have these fancy degrees that are the only ones writing their knowledge. So that breaks down those access barriers. We're going to talk about the uses of Wikipedia. So you can use it as, sorry, that's my cat in case you can't hear her. There's 3 main uses that I see for Wikipedia, but other people also see more. So you can find those on the web, but we're going to go through the 3 main ones today. The first one is it's a starting point for research. The second one is lateral reading. And the third one is collaborative class assignments where students bring their own expertise to help build upon existing knowledge online. So we're going to start with starting point for research. And I'll just walk you through the anatomy of a Wikipedia article and kind of what I do when I'm on Wikipedia. So this is the article for cat. It is like really long. And as you can see, it has its like little green plus sign, which means it's like a good article. It's also locked, semi-protected. So you have to be an editor on Wikipedia who's like had a certain number of edits in order to change anything. Since it's just like such a big topic that everybody looks up all the time. But you can see there's all of these hyperlinks internally. So these will link it to other articles on Wikipedia. And that just kind of helps like connect all of your concepts together. And it's like a really good starting place for learning about concepts if you're going to write a paper about all of them together, right? And then these little numbers at the end are external hyperlinks. So if you click those, it will take you down to the full bibliography on every Wikipedia article. And they should be peer reviewed, like articles where other people have read them and like scholars have approved them, or they're like from mainstream newspapers and other, like reliable sources, right? And they're added into Wikipedia. And so this is what people use it for in terms of like a starting place for research. As you can see, there's like hundreds of these like things that you can use in your papers and as citations. And people sometimes they're like, you can't cite Wikipedia. And like, that's not the purpose of Wikipedia. The purpose is to find this like wealth of information at the bottom and then like go from there and like get a basic overview. So as you can see, these little locks, I think that means they're paid. So those aren't open access, but these like little unlocked green things, that means it's freely accessible and probably open access online. But you can find all sorts of things. Like, I don't even know how many references are in this cat article, but there are a lot, 222. You can also listen to the article. There's all sorts of things here, and external links will like lead you to more things. Sometimes there's different like oral history collections or finding aids from different museums and places that have linked their collections to Wikipedia as part of this kind of like institution and Wikipedia collaboration. So you can find all sorts of things, and it's just about knowing how to use Wikipedia as a tool rather than an end all be all source. So all of these images, some of them are really strange. Like if you follow Depths of Wikipedia on Instagram, there's some really weird stuff. I think there was extreme ironing like a couple days ago where somebody was ironing underwater. And there were all sorts of funny photos for that. Also on Wikipedia, there is a talk page. Every article has one. So when you click on that, it'll take you and you will see the rating for the article. So sometimes they're going to be stubs, which means they need more information and more filled out. Sometimes they're going to be good articles, which is actually like a super good rating and very hard to get. Usually they're like B and C class, and those are like pretty good also. And sometimes they're like this like golden star, which means like amazing and impeccable and like all of those big words. So it gets pretty nerdy, and it's also like kind of fun to read the talk pages on like topics that you're like, oh, this is funny. But people will post, they'll be like, I disagree with this, or here's some other research that I found, or should we restructure it this way? And then people come to a consensus and they kind of like make those edits together. And I think that is like a really powerful way of like creating this knowledge base together. So that is a really cool thing that you can do when you start Wikipedia. You can also edit it. You can view the entire history. So if there's an edit that you like really don't like, and somebody keeps making it, you can see like their profile. And if you need to, you can be like, hey, like stop this, right? Or you can like see when that edit happened, and you can go back and you can revert it to before it happened. But there are so many edits, 500 plus on the cat page. So now we're gonna go back a couple pages. I'm gonna talk about lateral reading. So it's something y'all probably already do, but there's just a word to describe it, right? So if you are researching, let's say cats, you're not just gonna open one tab, you're gonna open 5 or 6 tabs, and you're gonna be like, cats is here, and this article about cats is this thing, and there's conflicting information oftentimes. So what people do, especially fact checkers, is they will type in the name of whatever they're researching, and then the word Wikipedia, and it will take them directly to Wikipedia. And that will help them like notice if there's any bias in what they're looking up and what like point of view it's coming from, and also like which facts are true and which are false. And even if Wikipedia is not 100% accurate, they can find those facts cited and then go there and confirm. So it's often the first place people go to check those things. And the term lateral reading just means like having multiple tabs open and looking through all of those. So it's like a really good kind of concept for kind of information and media literacy that we kind of naturally do anyways. It's just a word for it. And then in terms of collaborative class assignments, a lot of people have written, and I've hyperlinked here this open access book on Wikipedia and academic libraries, but there's all sorts of chapters on collaborating with students and like listening to their knowledge, because your students, like, they bring their own knowledge to the classroom, and oftentimes like teachers, there's like this banking model of education where you like fill your students up with knowledge, but there's this more collaborative one where you work together to create the knowledge, because your students will come to the classroom with their own kind of lived experiences and ways of talking about things and knowing. So Wikipedia is like a great classroom for educational assignments, and that they can all write articles on what they're interested in, and you can kind of work together and collaborate, and they will know more than you in some areas. They'll contribute to this encyclopedia as well. So the book that I linked has some really good chapters on collaborating with students and student employees, and also just like other cool chapters. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about barriers to access in terms of Wikipedia as well, because there are definitely barriers to access. So the editor statistics on Wikipedia. Wikipedia estimates that 77% of their editors are white and 91% of their editors are men. And that's how they phrase it on their website also. Their work shifts the demographic and empowers people to write their own history. So it's a collective of Black artists, like writing about Black artists on Wikipedia. And every month or every couple of months, they publish this bingo card on their Twitter, where you can go and you can write articles on the people on the bingo card, and then you can like win prizes and stuff. But they're super active. I think they're pretty active in New York and like kind of around the country now that things are virtual. But they're a great organization to get involved in if you want to change this kind of statistic or work to break down these barriers. And Art and Feminism is another like very cool Wikipedia organization. And as of 2011, the Wikimedia Foundation, which is this nonprofit that owns or operates Wikipedia and all of the wiki projects, that's like a whole umbrella thing. They found that less than 10% of its contributors identify as female. More recently, research points to 16% globally and 22% in the US. And the data relative to trans and gender non-binary editors is basically non-existent. And oftentimes in these surveys, they like will have no gender variant language. So it's like not super accurate. And the only statistic on like racial demographics that I could find was from Black Lunch Table. So there is like a lot of work to do internally in terms of like Wikipedia editors, making it like a safer space for people to write. And also like positions like mine where you get paid to write aren't that common. And I think that like paying people to do something like that is going to be helpful as well. But all of those things are linked in a second. So you will have access to all of their websites and can check those out. Two other barriers that have been identified as like Wikipedia editing barriers are neutral point of view and notability. Both of those like are inherently political. So I'm gonna admit somebody really quick. Both neutrality and notability are political because, you know, what is neutral when it's written by a certain point of view, which is often like this in the past and present, like this white mainstream media, right? And then again, like what is notable when, you know, people haven't been written into history for different reasons, often different like oppression reasons, right? And like what is notable in terms of there's also oral histories, there's not just written histories, and there's all sorts of things, both like locally and globally to consider. So these policies are Wikipedia editor policies that they have to follow. And I think those are huge barriers. And there's definitely nuanced conversation happening around them within the Wikipedia world. But those are some of the access barriers for sure. So these are the slides where I've hyperlinked these organizations. I can click on their websites really quick if you'd like to see. I think that Art and Feminism does a really good job of engaging new editors. And they have like a bunch of work lists, and they also have under resources, they have editing materials in English, Spanish, and Portuguese and French. So that's under here, which is pretty cool. Black Lunch Table does a variety of things, not just Wikipedia work, but their work on Wikipedia is really important. And they have an Instagram and a Twitter that they use to advertise different events that they're having. So I'm gonna go back. And then AfroProud is another Wikipedia organization. which is an initiative that seeks to increase awareness and the number of people of African descent who actively partake in Wikimedia and free knowledge, culture, and software movements. And I think it's run by Sherry Antoine right now. And she often collaborates with organizations in the US and organizations in Africa. And they work together to improve content on Wikipedia across the African diaspora, which is really cool. So I'll go to their website. Their editathons, I think, are super great because they don't expect you to write a whole article. They just expect you to like make an edit or like create an account. And I think that can be a lot less intimidating. Some other editathons I've been to, they're like, you have to write this whole thing. And it's like, especially if you're new to Wikipedia, like oftentimes you don't have time for that. And you don't really know how to do that within a period of 2 hours, which is totally valid. So they're really rad. Whose Knowledge is a global campaign to center the knowledge of marginalized communities, which is the majority of the world, on the internet. And they're a really cool organization. They have a lot of free resources on their website too. But they say three-quarters of the online population of the world today comes from the global South, from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, and nearly half of all women are online. Yet most public knowledge online has so far been written by white men from Europe and North America. To address this, they work particularly with women, people of color, LGBTQIA communities, Indigenous peoples, and others from the global South to build and represent more of all of our own knowledge online. And they have really awesome toolkits for this on their website. So we'll go there really quick. So this is definitely like a more global campaign, and it's definitely more multilingual than a lot of the other campaigns that happen that I have mentioned. They have these initiatives. They did this whole study on the state of the internet's languages, decolonizing the internet, honoring our guardians. They have these resources, how-to guides, reports, etc. They do really great work, and their presentations are really interesting and often free on YouTube. So those are kind of the Wikipedia barriers that people have identified. And I'm sure there are many others that have not been identified. And oftentimes these barriers are like very specific, but the root of the problem is very systemic. So Wikipedia and the internet's not going to change if our society is still in a space where we're reinforcing oppression and oppressing people, right? But there are these kind of different avenues to increase access that are being done on Wikipedia. And in terms of technology access, which is like a larger umbrella for the Kansas City Public Library, I'll go really quick through our tech access website and kind of talk about that. At the end, we will have space for questions. Actually, let's have space for questions right now since we're moving on topics. If anybody has Wikipedia questions, feel free to unmute and ask them. I can stop recording.
Thank you, Miranda.
Awesome. So now we're going to talk about larger types of access and also like what the library is doing to like decrease these access barriers. So we have a tech access department at the Kansas City Public Library. And we're going to walk through the website really quick. So as you can see, this is separate from the Kansas City Public Library website. It's kcpltechaccess.org, but that is hyperlinked in this presentation with the slides that you will get. So I think it's like a 5 or 6 person team, and they focus on like bridging digital divides and gaps in Kansas City specifically. So we have a mobile device lab that people can check out. I think all of our devices are checked out with community partners right now, but we have a lot of like Microsoft tablets that act as touch screens and different things also. We have partners here. You can borrow devices, become a partner, and it'll list our existing community partners. You can volunteer. So tech coaches are people that help people navigate the internet. And it's super helpful because if you think about it, like if somebody doesn't know, if they've never used the internet and somebody talks about like what Twitter is, they're like, I don't know what Twitter is because I've never used the internet. And it's like describing something like that to somebody who's never used it is like, it's like very, very necessary. And it also like, that's what tech coaches and tech navigators are for. So it's awesome that we have those. Their mission is to provide technology training and support for all people in our community. And it started in 2016. They have their tech coach volunteer program and a mobile computer lab. And I think they have like weekly classes or bi-weekly classes on different tech skills, whether it's building an email or learning about internet privacy, different things like that. They just had like a digital literacy week, I think in early October, where they talked more in depth about the services that Tech Access provides. You can also schedule one-on-one appointments with them if you have any tech questions.
Miranda, before you leave the page, I just wanted to highlight the orange talk box there, because they're also highlighting their emergency broadband benefit. So
yes, definitely. Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, if you need help paying for home internet, you can click there and apply for that through emergency broadband benefit. Jenny is the legal and government librarian, so she will know more about that. Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Not today, but I'm happy to. I always share information flyers about it, because it's very much about making sure people have internet access if they want it, if they need it, and that there are resources available here at the library and in the community to help people get there.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny.
My pleasure.
Sweet. So this is Tech Access. It's one of our many library departments, but they help kind of bridge some of those tech barriers that have in Kansas City. We are also a fine-free library. I think we got rid of fines a couple of years ago. I just started in May, but I remember I was using the library before then, and it was like, oh my gosh, no more fines. And I live in Lawrence now, and Lawrence followed shortly after, which is really awesome. I think libraries on the coast are catching up to that. I think Brooklyn Public Library just recently got their fines eliminated, but it's like a great policy, like at a systemic level, that like definitely affects the patrons in a positive way and helps increase access to library resources. I think Tech Access also recently got a grant for more devices, so stay tuned on that. But digital inclusion and different types of like digital literacy are like really, really prevalent right now because of COVID, and so a lot of money is being put into those initiatives. So it's really awesome that we got that grant. So that's the end of my Tech Access slide. I'm going to really quick mention that the barriers to access that I mentioned in this presentation are not all encompassing. There are specific access points that the library has identified and is like tried to address, you know, like with our staff who are like very knowledgeable on different things like that. But larger issues are definitely systemic, and they're not something that libraries can address alone or workers can address alone. And those barriers come like at a policy level, right? So there is digital redlining, which is a systemic barrier. And it's a way that the digital divide is maintained and extended. For example, like internet service providers don't provide service to area codes with low credit scores. And that is often like systemically racist. And so all of those things tie in together has much bigger systemic barriers to access than something that can be fixed by like one thing that a library does. But we do want to provide these services to you and do our best to make you feel comfortable and heard. We also have a planned obsolescence, which is another really big barrier. That basically means like when people design computers, usually big tech companies, right? They make them so that they will fail eventually because they want to sell you more and get more money from that. And that is like a huge barrier because people can't keep buying like $2,000 computers every couple of years. It's like ridiculous, and it's also like environmentally unsustainable. So different things like that are definitely larger, like policy level, like system barriers. But here at the library, we specifically can help with tech access, so education around technology and access to devices, as well as the broadband benefit thing, and also Wikipedia, all things Wikipedia. So I'm going to list some upcoming events really quick. We have Media Literacy Week continuing the rest of this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I'm leading another session on Thursday, specifically on creating and editing in Wikipedia, where we're going to be editing and creating articles on newspapers in Kansas City, and making those so that people can link to those on Wikipedia and making it more like a more reliable resource for people to use. So if you're curious about learning how to edit Wikipedia, come to that. Jenny and Liam Ridley are both doing presentations this week. I think Jenny is doing civic online reasoning and how to speak up without starting a showdown. And Liam Ridley's doing a mis and disinformation presentation tomorrow, but they all go along with the themes of National Media Literacy Week, and they're all these lunchtime talks like this one we're having. These are also hyperlinked to the calendar listings, so you can find those there. Friday, November 12th, there's going to be a community discussion on the Trust Me documentary from 12 to 1 p.m. So that's a feature-length documentary that delves into topics of manipulation and misinformation by exploring human nature, information technology, and the need for news literacy and media literacy to help people trust one another. So that should be really interesting. In November, we're going to have an intellectual property as a civil rights issue talk, specifically talking about copyright and like the historic lack of copyright or stealing of copyright in like Black and Brown communities. And we're going to have a civil rights and copyright lawyer from Chicago come and talk about that and her experience helping people advocate for their copyright. And she is one of the less than 2% of US licensed IP lawyers who are Black. And then after that, we're going to have our small business and financial literacy specialists walk people through a couple of our databases that will help you protect your intellectual property. So I thought that was like related to what we were talking about today, and I'd love to see y'all there. Additional resources, these are things that I'm currently reading. So you're welcome to like click through them, but you definitely don't have to. The Promise of Access is this really awesome new book that came out that questions why we're asking for like devices like at an individual level rather than like systemic change, which should be really good. Race, Rhetoric, and Research Methods is a book co-authored by Dr. Alexandria Lockett, who is a professor at Spelman College in Georgia. And she's been using Wikipedia in her classroom since 2007. And she has some amazing tools like on specifically adding Black women to Wikipedia, like in a classroom setting. So I'm really excited about that book that comes out, I think next month. Wikipedia in Academic Library is a global project. It's edited by Lori Bridges, Raymond Pun, and Roberto Arteaga. And that's a totally open access book. The same with Race, Rhetoric, and Research Methods, where you can just go and read any chapters that you want. And that's also about implementing Wikipedia instruction in a classroom and collaborating with students. Some articles, Dismantling the Evaluation Framework talks about like our current information ecosystem that we exist in, and like trusting students with their knowledge that they bring to the classroom. And then the Critical Disinformation Studies syllabus is a really good thing that traces the history of this kind of like rhetoric around mis and disinformation. And it also brings up, like it talks about case studies, including like the AIDS crisis and other things that were written in by the government. So it's like a little bit like more of like a critical syllabus, but I've used it a couple times and I really like it. So I have space for questions here and my contact information. So I will stop sharing unless I'll keep it up for a little bit so you can get my contact. I'll also drop it in the chat. But does anybody have any questions, comments, all sorts of things?
You want to stop recording just in case? Got some questions?